everyone. Welcome to Octane 20 Live. And this session is about best practices migrating SSO from CA, Oracle, Ping, and IBM to Okta. Before we get started, here's our safe harbor statement. Okta is a publicly traded company. So any statements that we say could be forward-looking. We share on this subject. Please feel free to read this at your own leisure. My name is Allison, and I'll be the moderator today. I've been with Okta for about 7 years, but before that, I help companies move to the cloud. Let's introduce our panel. Let's start with Dave.
Thanks, Anna. I joined Okta last year, and before that, I did Identity and Access Management course development at Oracle. And before Oracle, I spent 17 years at IBM doing Identity and Access Management solutions for customers and also training. Back to you, Anna.
Great, Dave. Let's move over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ona. Aaron Berman. Been at Okta about 18 months or so as an architect and access gateway specialist. I have spent about 20 years in the legacy IAM solutions. Almost all that was with CA, where I was the subject matter expert and sales engineering and subject matter and lead for the SiteMinder and directory product lines over there.
Awesome. And now let's move over to Vinny.
Thanks, Anna. How you doing? Vincent Talarico, Senior Sales Engineer over here in Northeast area for Okta. I've been here for about a year. Prior to Okta, I worked at Optiv Security within the IAM practice there, and then a sales engineer at Ping Identity. Thanks.
And last but certainly not least, let's introduce Mark.
Howdy, y'all. This is Mark. I'm also an access gateway specialist. I've been here for just about a year. And prior to that, I was at Oracle for 12 years, where I was also responsible for a sort of counterpart to Aaron, but on the Oracle side for all the directory and access products.
Great. Now that you've met our experts, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So our agenda during this session is we're going to start with how does OAG help me? How does Okta Access Gateway make me successful? Then we're going to spend quite a bit of time around our migration framework. It's really a prescriptive framework that we spent a lot of time developing so we can successfully migrate you from legacy WAMs to OAG. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different products caveats and what you have to look out for moving from a legacy system to Okta. And then last but not least, we'll talk about some next steps. So how does Okta Access Gateway help me? And when we look at this slide, we think about most of the world, and most of the world falls in that hybrid organization, right? So on the left-hand side, we do have some pure cloud organizations that are startups like FabFitFun or Trusted Health, and they're really, new startups that are just purely cloud. And on the right-hand side, we have those pure on-premises people that are larger organizations that have been around a while, but they're starting to think about how am I going to move to the cloud? So really, we're looking at those hybrid organizations that where most of you probably fall, 69% of the world does, where you have a little bit of on-prem, you have a little bit of cloud, you want to modernize your IT infrastructure, and OAG really helps us bridge that cloud and on-prem world. When we think about how OAG helps us, the thing we really want to focus on, it helps you modernize your IT at your own pace, right? We don't want to jump in and say, oh, let's do it now, right? We want to have that prescriptive path. So we really think about the one identity provider, managing everything in that centralized location, replacing your legacy WAM without changing code. Wow, that's a really big, important point because we can do that at zero app cost. And then adopting modern open standards, right? Really what that does, it makes you more agile and you're not locked into a vendor. It's a zero end of life vendor lock-in. So this is a look at an end user experience, and we're going to go over to Aaron, and he's really going to talk about how migrating to OAG doesn't affect the end user experience. Aaron?
Thanks, Sona. Essentially what you want to think about in a environment where some of these legacy solutions have been built and deployed, you want to think about the user experience, where most of the time those users have been trained to go directly to the application they're trying to access. And what they do is they either follow bookmarks, so they've got a page with all the links that they typically use on a daily basis. And they go in, and then what happens is something intercepts the request and redirects them to the logon page, number 2. And after they log in, then the system has remembered through one way or another with the original URL that they were trying to access, and it takes them back to the original URL, this time with a session token. And so our goal, Ona, is the Okta Access Gateway works exactly in the same manner, where the gateway sort of acts as that interceptor. They make the request, the interceptor intercepts it, redirects them now to an Okta login page. After they log in, then the user is taken back to the original panel. Now, so that is very much the same use case that users are used to experiencing. Of course, now users can also use the Okta dashboard as well, but that is a different experience than most of these users are used to. So we like this method.
Thanks, Aaron. That's really great, right? Because end user experience is very important to us here at Okta, and we don't want to interrupt that experience. We want it to make it seamless and easy to use. So let's talk about unified policies for a second. When we think about going to Okta Access Gateway, really something we want to highlight is that it gives you all of the power of Okta. The Okta policy framework is a very powerful tool within Okta. It really gives that administrator that single pane of glass to be able to decide at the login level, like with Threat Insights, or at the app level through application sign-on policies, and lots of things in between that we can use that assurance level for security purposes. Vinny, how does this compare to Ping?
Thanks, Ona. Sure. So in comparison to Ping, the Ping solution would be Ping Access, which is equal to the OAG appliance that Okta offers. The administrative experience, I think, is the biggest, is where we get the most out of it from OAG perspective, because what we're able to do is create these applications and mimic the policies, right, that were coming from the older legacy WAM system. But at the same time, we're also able to bring in the policies that the customers are using today for their SaaS apps, right? So they're used to having group-based access to these SaaS applications. Now with OAG, we're able to give them that same experience from an administrative side, where I can create these applications, assign them to the appropriate groups, therefore they'll have access to it from their Okta dashboard. I think to Aaron was just getting that, right? Where, hey, now users coming to one place, they get to their SaaS apps, they get to their on-premise apps as well. And it's really a uniformed experience for the admins, where it makes their life a lot easier. It gives you the ability to add on MFA, the different authentication policies that Okta has today, where adding MFA to these on-premise apps becomes a lot easier now because of that streamlined administrative experience.
Oh, great, Aaron. Right, so that's a really important point that Aaron just made too. Not Aaron, I'm sorry, Vinny. That Vinny just made, that it's that single pane of glass for the admin also. What about reducing infrastructure costs? So we see here in the top panel that with a traditional legacy system, we have lots of databases and middleware, and there's a lot of infrastructure cost. And when we look at the bottom part of the screen, we see with Okta Access Gateway that there's zero middleware, zero databases. This seems like a real big advantage. So Mark, we know solutions like OAM can have multiple servers. Can you talk real quick about how many servers you'd see in a typical deployment for OAM?
Yeah, sure. I always joke and say, Access Manager takes a village, and it feels like sometimes it literally takes a physical village to hold all the servers. So the total number, a small OAM deployment, like the very basic, is still about 15 servers, where I'd say on average it's about 40, and for larger ones it's 50, 60, maybe even 100. And each one of those servers requires additional expertise. You need a database administrator, somebody who's familiar with the operating system, somebody who knows about WebLogic, and somebody who knows about OAM itself. Compare that to the gateway experience, where most of that infrastructure is collapsed up into Okta Identity Cloud. And then we can, for example, go down to even say, for example, today you may have 40 OAM servers. We're down to 2 simple virtual machines running on premise for the Okta Access Gateway.
No, that sounds like a really nice infrastructure savings cost there. Dave, how does that compare to IBM?
Compares pretty similarly. So it also takes a village for IBM. One customer I worked with, we had about 40 servers over 5 different environments: Dev, Sandbox, QA Stage. We had WebSphere servers for identity management and also for access management. We had directory servers, and those would be either single or clustered. The WebSeal reverse proxy, that's now in the ISAM appliance, and Oracle database servers. So about 40 machines. Back to you, Anna.
Excellent. So it also sounds like it doesn't matter which legacy system you're running off of and you're migrating from, we're going to help reduce that infrastructure. So let's spend a little bit of time on this migration framework. So Okta has started to think about how am I going to migrate my WAM migration framework? And we can see here that we've come up with a prescriptive framework, and it's really a multi-step process. And there's less risk with it. And one of the reasons why there's less risk is because there's no big bang. What does that mean, no big bang? Well, really, when we think about big bang, it's like turning a light switch off and on. When I turn a light switch on, everything in my room comes on, right? And that's a lot of risk when we talk about applications. So when we have no big bang, what that allows us to do is it allows us to slowly migrate those applications to Okta, the Okta Access Gateway. And really, that's a migration at your own pace. So of course, with every migration plan, you start with planning your solution. So you think about what the apps you want to migrate, you think about different things with Okta and what kind of specialties you need, and then we move into configuring Okta. So step 2 is really, getting your Okta org, connecting your on-premise directories with AD, building a custom login page if you want to, or customizing that login page, getting to those security policies, really starting to think about, hey, what kind of policies do I need, using identity as the infrastructure, and then connecting with any third-party reporting tools. And then what we're going to see as we move through this migration framework is it's going to kind of split off here, right? And the top part is using Okta and the OIN. So I want to have quick time to value with Okta, and one way I can do that is using the Okta Integration Network, or the OIN. And this allows us to quickly get Okta up and running with those cloud applications. And so when we start to do this migration, it really becomes a parallel, like let's think about our cloud apps, and then let's move into classifying our WAM apps. And that's B. And I'm going to really turn it over to the experts here to talk about this. So when you start thinking about your WAM apps, let's start with Mark. What are some of the things that help you classify a WAM app for migration?
Sure. So what you want to do is, well, first off, is just get the list of all the applications that you have. And also, for example, particularly look at your enterprise apps, like, for example, Oracle. I said, like, besides being the guy who knows all the things about Oracle Access Manager, I also know from an enterprise single sign-on perspective a lot about the Oracle applications, like eBusiness Suite, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards. And what's great is that because those all have a standard pattern for how they migrate. And then what you want to and for example, those are going to be, so you have those, you'll identify those patterns. Then we're going to look at what is, for example, on premise that maybe still is doing desktop single sign-on with Windows, which is, or you may also know it as Kerberos, because those are becoming the next level of apps. Then the ones we're going to start looking at is how do we address looking at the ones we don't know about, like, are they custom apps? Do they still do web username, password? Maybe they had, if you're migrating off, sorry, in the case where we're migrating off of WAM, are there any apps, like the ones that are going to take the most work will be the ones that had actually tightly integrated by putting an agent within the app itself, and as opposed to being behind an existing proxy server.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Aaron, is there anything else you'd like to add about how to classify and migrate WAM apps?
I would just continue to echo on what Mark said around understanding the policies for the applications, understanding which ones have custom code, which ones don't have custom code, knowing the header variables, knowing the URLs that are protected in these applications, knowing the load of the applications as well, and understanding all of those different pieces. Then you want to probably just figure out which ones you want to bite off first. the first application you might not want to be your biggest app. You might want to, kick the tires and dip your toe in a little bit and do 2, 3, 4 apps that are a little bit smaller before you do the big app. To just be more reassured about the solution as well.
Oh, that's great advice, right? That's, again, that part of that do it your own pace prescriptive framework that we use. Pick the apps you're comfortable with first, do the simpler ones, right? And then migrate to the more complex ones. Dave, I'm going to change the question up a little bit for you. As we're thinking about moving these apps and classifying them, what about that end user experience? What impacts is this migration going to have on the end user experience?
Well, one of the things to look at is how they're accessing the app now, and Aaron talked about it from the standpoint of a URL, or if they have some other portal that they go to access the app. For the ISAM appliance-based apps, it depends on the type of junction that was used when it was configured. So for virtual host or transparent junctions, the user experience is going to be the same. So we can host that same URL path on an OAG, have similar type backend policies for different parts of the application, and they have a very similar, if not exactly the same user experience. If they use standard type junctions, then they would have to change those paths. Those paths are going to change a little bit.
That's great to know, right? So again, we're echoing the fact that we want to keep end users top of mind, and we're not going to affect their experience too much, but definitely something to keep top of mind. Vinny, when we think about classifying and migrating, we also want to think about the other integrations between Okta and your deployment. So what other advice could you give when you're configuring OAG?
Sure. Yeah, so a complete agreement with the rest of the panel in regards to, putting these apps in buckets, right? The more complex to the least complex, right? And kind of get that low-hanging fruit here. But when you get to those apps that maybe are more complex, I think those are conversations you need to start having with the app owners about modernizing those apps. So leveraging Okta's ability, modern capabilities with OAuth, OpenID Connect, things along that line, and really having those conversations with the app owners, right? So knowing that, yeah, we can put these behind OAG if we want to leave it status quo, but really, let's really think down the line and really be there for them to think bigger picture, right? And modernize those applications and really getting them under the same Okta umbrella, but slightly different deployment model for those applications.
Definitely, that's a great point, right? Just because we've always done it one way, does that mean we should continue to do it that way? So modernizing your infrastructure when you're looking about implementing OAG is a great point to make. Excellent, Vinny, thank you. The last step in our migration framework here is, hey, when you have everything migrated off, it's time to uninstall your WAM. That's the party time, right? You're like, yay, I've done it, the big relief. I can't wait till this happens, right? The end of every deployment. But then there's some other things you want to think about too. So there's a bullet point here that says, investigate your mastery options, right? If we're truly thinking about migrating our infrastructure to the cloud and modernizing IT, we want to start to think about how we're mastering those users. We might be using AD or LDAP, and again, status quo should we just continue to do that? Or should we think about maybe using Universal Directory and the power of Okta to leverage some tools that we have in the cloud? So, no migration, no implementation is ever done, right? Because we're always innovating, we're always thinking about new technologies. So at the end of your implementation, let's think about new technologies that we might be using. So let's talk about some of these caveats in these products that we've implemented. So this is a great moment in time that you should probably get out your phones and take a screenshot of this, because there's a lot of great information on this slide, and we want you to be able to kind of come back and reference it. So we're going to go through this slide expert by expert, and they're going to break down the different colors for you, the green, the oranges, and the reds. And that it's working from the agents to the customizations to the coding issues that you might run into when you're migrating off these legacy applications. So we're going to start with CA. So Aaron, you want to walk us through your part of the slide?
Yeah, thanks, Ona. So in a SiteMinder world, the two main ways that people secure content is with web agents, which is on the web server, and then the gateway server, or formerly known as secure proxy server. The secure proxy server, more or less, is almost a direct replacement of, or the OAG is almost a direct replacement of the secure proxy server in concept, architecture, and how it works. Of course, OAG talks to Okta instead. But the web agent architecture is designed where the web agents sit on the web servers themselves. And while the OAG can do all the same header variables and integration with the applications the same way, a lot of times people get hung up, so that's good news, but sometimes people get hung up on the architecture of it being a reverse proxy server rather than being of a plugin that sits on the web server itself. But those are pretty much direct migration, because it's the same header variables. Where you start having to dive in a little bit deeper and sometimes change the architecture a little bit is when you get into some of the other types of agents that are built into SiteMinder. Things like the application server agents for WebLogic and WebSphere and JBoss. They sometimes do different things. So like the JBoss agent inside of SiteMinder is pretty much just a web agent anyway, that just plugs into JBoss. But WebSphere, the agent takes advantage of the IBM WebSphere identity asserter API to actually assert the identities into WebSphere itself. And WebLogic, you can actually, with SiteMinder, do things like create and update the Java principal with the authenticated user's identity so that the Java apps running underneath the app server can know who the user is. And so in Okta world, we're gonna integrate with those app servers, but we're gonna integrate them differently. We might be doing a SAML integration directly to the app server itself from Okta in those cases. And then we have to look at the customizations. SiteMinder has loads of places where you can customize the code, custom auth schemes, custom responses, assertion generator plugins for SAML and things like that as well. And then also there was a whole list of what was called global delivery modules. And those were basically services-driven solution kits to meet specific use cases as well. And so you have to look at what you have deployed in those areas to make sure you understand the same logic. So maybe if you have a assertion generator plugin that reaches out to a SQL database to pull in additional data before SiteMinder generates a SAML assertion, maybe you need to use an Okta hook now to do that sort of technology. Or maybe you need OAG to directly connect to the AD or the SQL database to pull that piece of data in to present that as a header to the application. So you have to look at slightly different architectures and different flows for this data, but you can generally meet the same set of use cases. Where you can't meet the use cases is applications that are coded directly to the SiteMinder SDKs. Companies that have a custom SiteMinder agent, for example. If that custom SiteMinder agent is coded inside the app to connect to the SiteMinder policy server and ask it questions, you're going to have to open that code up to now have that application call Okta's API set. Now, the good news is Okta has a great, robust API set that's probably much more robust than SiteMinder's, so you can probably still do everything you want to do, but you have to do it a little bit differently.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Let's move on to Mark and Oracle.
Yeah, so it's very similar capability set on the Oracle's Access Manager side as compared to SiteMinder, and you'll probably see a similar pattern with the other platforms too. But the good news is that from Oracle perspective, a lot of the applications were built with the same kind of same deployment model. If you're moving off Access Manager to the gateway, which is they were all behind a Oracle HTTP server, which is Oracle version of Apache. And so we can just put, from an architecture standpoint, we can just put the gateway in there. What I typically see as a biggest challenge for Oracle Access Manager customers in migrating is a discussion around custom data sources and their authorization policies. The thing there I tell people is that with the gateway, we can support all those custom data sources and we can support all your policies. I always just encourage people to take a second and review them, because a hidden secret, or probably a widely known secret among the Oracle Access Manager customers, is a lot of times we were doing policies and custom data sources to sort of work around limitations with some of the early generation LDAP servers that just don't apply anymore in something like the Okta directory. that you get as part of the as part of being part of the Okta Identity Cloud. Or at least the capabilities there. The other thing I would talk about is that for all of you out there, is that, you know, from the Oracle side, even if you've never deployed Oracle Access Manager, and say, for example, you were a SiteMinder customer and you never, because, you know, Oracle licensing, you didn't, and support, you never tried to connect SiteMinder to Oracle applications, but you got eBusiness Suite, you got PeopleSoft, you got JD Edwards, you got Hyperion, you got OBIE, you got Clinical Trial Medical Services, or I could go on. Oracle has, I believe now, like 15,000 different applications. All of those applications, you know, particularly the on-premise stuff, I would say at least 99% of those on-premise applications, they're going to integrate with the gateway. They will have, because they were, as I said, because they were all designed to be integrated with Oracle Access Manager. So that's the real key important part there, is that the ones were designed to be integrated with Oracle Access Manager, which is pretty much anything was on-premise. We can leverage those to connect with the Okta Access Gateway. And so what we're starting to see now is a lot of customers calling us, or, you know, who are saying, hey, look, I have eBusiness Suite. We've always wanted single sign-on with it, but we were never able to. Either, you know, we had SiteMinder, we had IBM, we had Ping. We couldn't make, you know, we couldn't make that work with the Oracle stuff, or we're just like, man, you know, we didn't have the village to deploy Oracle Access Manager. Now you have an opportunity to do that with the Okta Access Gateway. Right.
That's great news, right? Now that's a great point. All those apps are kind of built the same, so we can connect to those easily with Okta Access Gateway. Dave, what about IBM?
Okay, looking at the IBM list that we have there, we also have web server agents that have been put out there, but most of the time it's actually instead using the Web Seal or ISAM virtual appliance reverse proxy. And in those cases, it's going to be like headers that you pass to the application, IV user, IV groups, and you just need to find out what those headers are, and we can replicate that in the OIG. The only caveat there would be that for IV groups, make sure that you're passing what the application expects. If it's just IV user, that's going to be really, really simple. For application servers, if those are sitting behind a proxy and just getting headers, then you're fine. You're already good to go. But, you know, IBM likes to make things complicated at times. So we have this thing called the lightweight third-party authentication, or also the trust association interceptor. Those things actually work together. And if you have that kind of stuff, or using the JBoss adapter, you're going to have to do some reconfiguration to get this to work behind a proxy. So, but you can basically reconfigure it to accept headers as well. So then you just go behind the proxy and get your authentication that way. Now on the customization side, I worked with a customer where we did a CDAS customization to do insert a custom header. And in that case, basically, you know, we can do a lot of header insertions with OAG, a lot of different ways to do it. And so we can just replace that with a standard product feature for OAG. But if you have some stuff out there and customized for Web Seal and CDAS, that's in C coding. So, you know, a lot of effort was done in that. You need to find out, and maybe it's been a while since it was done. You know, how was it done? What is it doing? You know, what is the expected result of, and then you need to replicate that with OAG. Now for coding, IBM provides like a mobile SDK. They have the Java authentication authorization service. You also have the C authorization API for C applications. And so those kind of things will need to have some recoding done in order to live in the Okta and OAG world. And back to you, Ona.
Excellent. Sounds like, you know, the more complex it gets, it might be easier to use OAG. So thank you, Dave. And last but not least, Vinny with Ping.
Thanks, Ona. Yeah, so when we talk about Ping, and I kind of like equating this to buckets as we talked earlier in regards to that migration off, right? So when we talk about a direct migration, you're going to find in the majority of Ping access implementations with Ping are gateway centric, right? So they're very similar to OAG. So moving those apps from Ping access to OAG are going to be something as simple as some DNS changes, right? We're going to evaluate those apps. We're going to evaluate what headers are being passed, things along that nature. But, you know, maybe some group, whatever policies based on group access. But that's going to follow that big chunk of the apps that you're going to come with. We're coming from Ping access to OAG because it's a very similar implementation. But if we move over to, you know, there are customers that, you know, as you guys know, still have applications that need agents. For whatever reason, they wrote the apps that are very agent specific and they require an agent to be on those web servers. So we'll run into those, right? And this is where we fall into the analysis stage of it all, right? Is where do these apps fall, right? And what we're looking at, what can we do to, you know, move them, migrate them off, right? So when we talk about the agents, you know, is there a way to get these behind the agent, right? Maybe those are one-offs that stick around and we have a coexistence model that lives for a period of time, right? Until we can really come up with a plan to get those off of there. Customizations around, you know, again, authentication policies, right, and access policies to those applications, to, you know, down to the URL level, right, being able to map those and understand what's going on, you know, from one environment to the other, and just and implementing them within OAG. And I think that the last step there is the code changes ones are the ones where, you know, you're going to hear me say it often, right, is modernize as much as we can. Ping access gives the ability to, you know, to leave you in an old state, right, where they're creating these custom tokens, and these applications we're still letting them live and leverage these custom tokens, right? And, you know, you just keep adding on to that complexity, and you're never going to get off of that complexity, right? So those are the ones that we're really going to push and have our dev teams work with you guys to work with them to again, modernize, right? To get them off of there. Let's stop doing this stuff that's ancient, right? Because we're going to be moving to the cloud. We're going to be getting these off-prem. Let's move to a more modernized architecture and see where we can replace some of those.
Excellent. That's a great point. Modernizing your architecture, not only just carrying around that legacy information, but really taking a look and trying to deep dive in and figure out where we can go more modern. Okay, so these are our panelist experts, and they've answered a lot of questions for us today as we've moved through the different migration framework. But I'm sure what's going to happen is tomorrow you're going to wake up and you're going to go, why didn't I ask Dave a question about such and such? Or why didn't I ask Vinny a question about how Ping does that? Well, the great news is we've created a distribution list, and you can ask these experts after Octane Live. So take a screenshot of this picture here, and in a couple of days, when you have a question, reach out to them. They're more than excited to answer anything that you might have regarding OAG. I'm not going to say AMA them, right? Ask them anything, but ask them anything about OAG. How about we do an AMA around OAG? Can I use any more abbreviations in one sentence? I don't think so. We love them here at Okta, right? So make sure you save this D list, because it can really be valuable to you as a resource as you finish up with Octane Live and have questions later down the road. So our key takeaways today: OAG is your path to IT modernization. And the key there is at your own pace, right? We've heard our experts talk about how you can move off these legacy systems. And regardless of the solution, the migration path is the same. We've built a prescriptive migration framework to help you move from IBM or OAM or any of those other abbreviations of those old legacy WAMs. And then we can use different bridges to help you get there. And you heard Vinny talk a lot about that, right? You know, just because you did something in the past that way doesn't mean you should carry that forward. So let's think about those different thoughts process around migrating from legacy to the cloud. And then again, we have a bunch of cool, really resources to support you along the way. That distribution list is one of the best ones you're gonna get this entire conference. These guys are really super smart. They know Okta, they know the legacy stuff. They can really help answer any question that you want. So that's one really great, cool resource. Another really cool resource that we have is in our next step section. And this is gonna be this ebook. So again, grab a screenshot, get your phone up, grab that bit.ly or that QR code. We've developed an entire ebook around our migration framework to answer all of your questions. So it goes in depth on this framework on how you can move off of the legacy system into OAG. So again, I'm going to give you a second to grab that screenshot.
And Ona, while they're doing that, there's just a couple of other recommendations I can think of making about when you're using the gateway as well. What I found is, especially if you're not used to a gateway-based architecture, generally it makes quite a bit of sense to try to keep the gateway close to the applications, network speaking. You typically don't want to have a large network latency between your gateway and your application, just because the gateway has got to go back and forth to the application on each request.
Excellent. That's a great last tip from Aaron. Do you either, any of the rest of you guys have a last tip you want to throw in, Vinny or Mark or Dave?
I got echo Aaron's, and I probably should have brought that up, right? With the migrations, with these, applications owners that love the agents, right? How do I protect the back door, right? How do I, what can we do to protect the back door and not let somebody bypass the proxy, right? Because we're going to a proxy architecture. What can we leverage to do that? And with OAG, we can leverage mutual TLS, right? Connectivity between OAG servers and app servers, right? To protect that and tighten up that security.
Excellent. Mark, Dave, got anything you want to throw in last minute?
Yeah, I got something. I will say, particularly for y'all out there who have Oracle e-business suite. Historically, Oracle e-business suite not only did it require like Oracle Access Manager, it also required additional components, Oracle Internet Directory and the e-business suite access gate. One of the other great things about the gateway is we can do single sign-on into e-business suite without any additional components have to be added on to e-business suite. We're able to do it with just configuration changes into e-business suite. So that's a lot less hardware you have to add in, a lot less software you have to add in. It takes the time of implementation down by about 90%. So it's, if you've ever been thinking like, man, I really want to get single sign-on, I'd like to make it easier, I want MFA into e-business suite, you really need to come talk to us about the Okta and Access Gateway solution.
That time to value, right? We pride ourselves here at Okta about our speed to deployment, and OAG is included in that. Dave.
Yeah, just a couple of points to make is that, you may be wondering, you have an IBM ISAM appliance. Why do I want to replace that with an OAG appliance? Well, we call them both appliances, but really not very similar at all on the inside. On the outside, they're both reverse proxies. On the inside, on the IBM side, you have all that other stuff that you had with all the other servers, including a directory server, it's in their appliance. It's very complicated on the inside. The federation's kind of bolted in there, and it's just as complicated as the original IBM Federation product that I used to teach for years ago. It's still all there. You got to read, multi-100-page documents and manuals to figure out how to configure this stuff. Now look at the OAG gateway. It's simple. It's beautiful. It has simple SAML. It uses the Nginx, and if you've used Nginx, it is a wonderful, wonderful proxy product. I built a streams proxy with this thing that works like great as a load balancer. Now that's one thing I wanted to say. Now the other thing is for developers, you may be afraid of your custom code that you have written that uses IBM custom libraries and Java resources and SDKs. Look at what Okta has to offer. Before I even joined Okta, I was like curious, how you support developers and how we support developers. And so I went out on the web and, I said, well, I'm going to write a PHP app and I want to do authentication in the app. And I'm going to try to do it with Auth0, and I'm going to try to do it with Okta. And I'm going to see, who does, I couldn't get the Auth0 thing to work, and Okta had it up and running in less than a day. It was great. It just worked wonderfully. And if you take that customer identity class, you've already seen the sign-in widget. It's beautiful stuff. So, check it out. That's what I have to say. Back to you.
I think that's great. I'm not sure if I've ever heard anyone describe OAG as beautiful, but I'm going to use that from now on when I'm talking with customers, that OAG is beautiful. So that's going to be my new tagline. Thank you, Dave, for giving me that. Awesome. Well, we just want to thank you guys for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this session with our panel of experts, and I hope you've learned something more than just Okta OAG is beautiful. I think that's a great tagline though. So again, thank you for joining. And if you have any questions, just shoot us an email from that distribution list. They'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.